Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. People do not light a lamp and put it under the bushel basket. Rather, they put it on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Again, a word of God that is still speaking. Thanks be to God. So how often do you hear those words, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world," but you never actually ask yourself, what does that really look like to be salt and light? Or maybe we don't take it seriously because after all, Jesus is the light of the world. We aren't. Who are we to take Jesus' place? I think the reality is most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about being light. We're too busy doing the laundry, cooking dinner, cleaning up. We're going to work. We're taking the kids to school. We're meeting up with friends. We don't have a lot of extra time and energy to spend on that question. What does it mean to be light in this world? For the most part, I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect for the most part, we hear those words and they just roll off of us like water off a duck. They feel good, but we don't really do anything with it. That's why most Sundays I like using it as a benediction. It reminds us, it reminds you, and it reminds me that when we leave the sanctuary, whether that's the sanctuary in this building or the sanctuary that we are in our house or in our car or outside, wherever we are where we're worshiping today, when we leave our sanctuary, we are the light of the world. It isn't just, we hope you will be the light of the world. You are the light of the world. It is your sacred calling. It is who you are. Those of us who have been baptized have received the Spirit of Christ, and we have said we will live in this world as His disciples. We will be that light that shines in the darkness. We will be a sign of hope to people who have given up hope. But I think sometimes we need to be reminded of that because, as I say, we're busy doing laundry and other things like that. But can you imagine the kind of impact you can have if you remember that when you go out these doors? A true story. Two best friends, they met while they were in high school, walking home from school one day. It turns out they lived about a block apart. One kid was new to the school, and he was kind of in a funk on the way home, and they weren't walking together. One was about a little ways in front of the other. And the new kid dropped his books. He kind of, tripped or something, dropped his books. The other kid saw it and came and helped him pick them up, and then they walked home together. Years later, that first boy thanked his friend for saving his life. And his friend had no clue what he was talking about. And he explained, "Do you remember that day when we met? We were walking home from school. I had decided to kill myself when I got home that day. But then you stopped and helped me. And I decided not to kill myself that day." We may not see the darkness that someone else is in, but they may see the light if we let it shine. So let your light shine. Let it shine through the way you live your life. Let it shine through the way you talk about others when they aren't in the room. Let it shine through the way you handle disappointments and the way you handle betrayals. Let it shine through whatever it is you happen to be doing or feeling at the moment, because it matters, often more than you will ever know. There may be a day, you probably won't even be aware of it, where the way you treat someone who has wronged you shows someone else that violence isn't always the answer to violence, that forgiveness can open doors to healing. There may be a day when somebody sees your generosity and is moved to generosity themselves because of it. And they discover there's more joy in giving than in receiving or taking or hoarding. How you treat other people, how you talk about other people, often makes impacts we never see. But if you're conscious of letting love and hope and grace shine through you, you may save a life. These words come in a list of sayings, a list of collected sayings that Jesus gave at various points in his life. The Gospel of Matthew puts them all together in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's highly unlikely that Jesus actually rattled off all of those sayings in one pithy sermon. But rather Matthew pulled them together to teach new disciples what it looked like to follow Jesus. That's why this reminder of you are the light of the world is at the heart of the Sermon of the Mount. Because to follow Jesus is to let your light and his light through you shine in a world that's desperately in need of light. The whole rest of the Sermon on the Mount explains what that looks like in real life. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Give without the thought of reward. Let your words stand with integrity. Don't repay violence with violence, either by word or deed. Don't be consumed with worry. Trust God. Don't judge. Remember what happens when you judge? You open the door for someone else to judge you, and frankly, none of us will come out smelling like roses. So be gracious. And in everything, treat everybody like you wish they would treat you. That's what it looks like to let your light shine. It isn't some theoretical thing where we just glow when we are out there. It shines through the acts and the words that we do every day and in every moment. So think about this in two ways. First, how are you letting God's light shine through you in your day-to-day activities? Do you open doors for strangers? I was at the gas station the other day, and there's a young man going in. He was quite a ways in front of me, but nonetheless, he stood there with the door open until I got there. Any of the rest of us probably would have let it shut. I was that far behind him. It made an impact. Do you insist on your own rights? Or do you shift your focus to respecting the dignity of others? Do you treat others with kindness no matter how they treat you? Do you love those you don't like? Do you offer a kind word to the person who serves you at a restaurant, even if the servant wasn't that great? And do you go out of your way to help someone, or are you too busy? Which is kind of like putting a blackout curtain over the light. So be conscious of how you let God's light shine through your normal everyday activities. And then be conscious of how you hide that light. Holding grudges, nursing hurt feelings, using people to get what you want, letting your bad moment become somebody else's bad moment. We've all had them. The question is, in your bad moment, what do you want others to see? What do you want to show? Do you want to show God's light or your darkness? It's not a bad question to ask yourself. As I say, we all have bad moments. You'll find that if you start asking yourself that question when you're in a bad moment, what do I want other people to see? You'll find it's easier and easier to catch yourself from letting your bad moment become somebody else's. And then your bad moments will probably be shorter and less frequent. Because the more conscious you are about letting light shine no matter what, remember, the darkness can never overcome the light. Second thing to think about. Where is God calling you to be especially conscious of shining God's light? Our other reading was from the Old Testament prophet of Jeremiah. He was speaking to the exiles who were heading off into exile in Babylon. And speaking for God, he says, "Seek the welfare of the city where I am sending you." Not only should we let God's light shine in our day-to-day activities, God calls us to think bigger and find ways to let that light shine and impact our communities. I would expand that to say the world, because we are all connected. Where is God calling you to focus that light in a special way to have a larger impact? Theologian Frederick Buechner said, "The place God calls you is that place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meets." By gladness, he's talking about passion. He's talking about what makes your heart ache. And where do you wish you could make a difference? Maybe that's where God is calling you to focus that light. Maybe that's where God is calling you to share hope. So how can you get involved? Can you volunteer? Can you give? Can you help behind the scenes? But wherever your heart is aching, or whatever your heart is aching for, that might be a good clue that God is calling you to focus the light there, to do something so that God can do what God does best, which is to bring hope. I believe that's what God calls us to do as individuals, which is to follow where Christ leads us. For the church, I think it's a little different, actually. When we talk about being the light of the world, letting God's light shine, I think God calls the church to lead. As individuals, we follow, but I think God calls the church to lead. So what is the role God is calling our church to have in this world? How is God calling our church to be a leader in our community? As Jeremiah said, seeking the welfare of the city in which we live. Because we aren't called to be the church just for our own sake and our own comfort. We are called to be the church for the sake of the world, the whole world, and our neighbors. So just like you and I need to figure out individually, what does it look like for us to let God's light shine? We as a church have to figure that out too. What does it mean for the church to let God's light shine? What does it look like for us to be light to our neighbors and our city and our world? We have to be concrete about that, or our light will be pretty dim. But when we get concrete, we lead by example, and others then join us in the work. So where's our collective passion leading us? And what are the needs that awaken that passion? Because that's the intersection where our light will shine brightest, and God is most powerful, and hope is most real. You are the light of the world. You matter more than you probably even know. In both big and little ways, you will either be a beacon of hope by letting your light shine in concrete ways, or you will cloak hope in shadows by turning away from those ways of Christ. You don't need me to tell you what happens when we start cloaking that light in shadows. All it takes is one judgmental word, and we've turned somebody away from God. Because if God's people are like that, then God must be like that, right? All it takes is one time sometimes of hiding that light, and we chase people away from being a part of God's family. And so we got to think about that individually, but we have to think about that as a church too. We're either going to be a beacon of hope, actively living out God's love in the world, or we will wrap a blackout curtain around the light and no one will even know we're here. Let's not do that. Let's live a life that lets Christ's light shine clearly and brightly through everything we say and everything we do. Let Christ awaken your heart to the needs around you and meet Christ there, because you are the light of the world, and it is through you that people will see love. Amen.